Okay, we're continuing now with part 11, Best of the West in Art, Movies, and Music by me, Pete Rogers. Okay, this is chapter 2, the second best things in the best of the West. The first quote is from Gottfried Leibniz. There is either God or nothingness, and that is true. Once you get rid of God, you have no moral foundation, and everything goes down into the tubes, down in the garbage can, okay? Now, I went to Stanford in the 1980s, and the freshman year there was a class for the entire year. It was on the quarter system, so a three-quarter class called Western Civ, 5 units. So it was a big class. Everybody had to take it, and it was the best class I ever took in 4 years over there. You had to read all the big books. You had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey of the ancient Greeks. You had to read the Bible. You had to read about Galileo, Boethius, Consolations of Philosophy. You had to read about Cicero, and a whole bunch of other, the great books of the Western civilization. But then this political correctness came along in, I think, around 1990 or so, where they said, oh, Western civilization is BS. We want multiculturalism. All cultures are equal. It's racist to just make everybody learn Western civilization. Okay, and you know who was the leader? This was Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson got together with the Black Student Union at Stanford in the 1980s, and they started chanting, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. Insane. I'm sure they paid him a lot of money to do this. And Jesse Jackson said that to teach Western civilization is ethnocentric and racist, and to require students to take a class about the ancient Greeks and Romans of Europe was racist. Okay? So what's happening is they try to train America that whenever somebody uses the R word, you must immediately comply to whatever their demands are. It's insane, okay? Ever since the beginning of civilization, every single person ever born looked up at parents that looked pretty much like them, and that's what they're used to. So everybody likes the stuff from their childhood. So if you're used to people from whatever country you come from, that's what you're most familiar with. And every country always has a story about its ancestors in its past saying that they're the best people that ever existed and their country's better than all the other countries. That's normal for people to think that way. And as Bloom had said in his book, The Closing of the American Mind, a society kind of has to be that way. People have to love and appreciate their own thing in order to protect and to maintain it. Okay, but now there's this big push because the billionaires who run the world, they want to get rid of Christianity and Western civilization because it's the only thing that could stop them from bringing back slavery and reduction in the number of people, the population, okay? So they have to get rid of it. And there's a lot of people like Jesse Jackson are happy to go along with this nonsense because they're getting paid to do it, okay? He made millions and millions of dollars with all these games he plays. All right. So anyways, it's also the case that, when you're trying to promote socialism and, the cow and the moon and then, what comes next to the east, you can't logically promote that. I mean, what are you basically telling everybody? I'm going to take all your stuff away and make you into a slave. Now, only a moron would want that, but unfortunately, most people are close to being morons, and they're able to buy this nonsense about multiculturalism and this other stuff. And so they're willing to destroy Western civilization without realizing they have nothing to replace it except slavery. Okay? And the other thing, too, is you have to look at what somebody actually does. Just because a euphemism is used to describe it, like if somebody says, oh, I have a gender-affirming surgery for a grade school kid, that's not gender-affirming, that's castration. Okay? You have to be able to think clearly and say what things actually are. And if people can't do that, and many people can't do that, then it's very easy to push people into slavery. Okay? The long-term goal is get rid of Christianity in the West, make everybody poor, make it a third world country, force them into worse and worse situations, decrease the population numbers, cull the herd, okay? And it's all happening, okay? And a lot of people think they're benefiting from it, and there are people who will benefit in the short run, but who won't benefit in the long run. Okay, so, that's why it's all happening, and it's sad because it's so obvious, to anybody with a brain, but most people don't really think. And they think it's all kind of fun and games to destroy Western civilization and to destroy America and to destroy the West. But what they don't realize is it's the only thing between them and slavery. Okay, once the West is gone, once Christianity is gone from this earth, once Western civilization is gone from this earth, there will be nothing but like what you had in these primitive countries with a dictator kicking everybody's butt. Okay, slavery still exists all over the world. And it's coming back to the United States, even though people don't like to talk about it in terms of children, you know what, and then the thing like you have lights at the traffic, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so the people who at Stanford who tried to stand up for Western Civ class said, look, Western Civ is this civilization is the foundation of modernity for the entire world. It's the source of philosophy, of theater, of sophisticated painting, of sculpture, of architecture, of plumbing, of aqueducts, of Christianity, of the Bible, the novel, electricity, the telephone, transatlantic flight, the radio, the steam engine, the train, the automobile, airplane, movies, television, computer. Basically, almost everything comes from the West. Other countries aren't even close. It's not like 5-4. It's like 99-1. The West is so much better than every other civilization that has ever existed on the face of the earth. We don't get our inventions from Egypt. We don't get them from South America. We don't get them from Africa. We don't get them from Asia. We get them from the West, okay? Yeah, sure, China invented a few things, but they couldn't develop anything because the Mandarins would destroy anything some inventor would make. Paper, gunpowder, great ships like Cheng Ho. The Mandarins would steal it and destroy it. Okay, and that's what dictators do. They don't allow anybody to do anything. That's why nothing good has come from Russia in the last 100 years, because the dictator tyrants of Russia don't allow the people to do anything. That's what always happens in these tyrannies. Okay, they want conformity, obedience, and they get rid of the smart people. Okay, smart people are not welcome, and the United States is becoming like that. That's not good. So if you want to understand anything about the modern world, you have to study Western civilization. And also, the reality is almost all of it was done by men. Let's be honest about it. There's a value to being honest about it. Because right now the goal is to get rid of all the Western men, the white Christian men. And once you get rid of them, okay, where is the philosophy? A lot of these other cultures, they don't even have a religion. They have a philosophy, okay? They're atheism, okay? Buddha is not a god. Buddhism is not a religion. It's a philosophy. Hinduism, from what I've read by Indian authors like Vishal Mangalwadi, it is a philosophy that is atheism, okay? Where are you going to go with that? Confucius is not a god. That is a man. That is a philosophy. What I'm trying to say is, without a God-based worldview that man is created in the image of God, where is your moral foundation to stand up to tyranny? You don't have it. That's why the billionaires want to get rid of Christianity, because it's the only thing that can stand up to bringing back slavery. This is obvious. It's in writing. This has been in writing for decades. It makes me sad because I can see exactly what's happening and what's going to happen. But so few people can that basically smart people were irrelevant. I'm used to being irrelevant most of my life, okay, because, I'm like at a higher level of knowledge. And basically, when you're in such a small, tiny minority, whatever you say or do is completely irrelevant. Because you don't have any influence, okay? So it doesn't matter that it's obvious to me that we are like a freight train heading back into slavery, because the rest of the public is just oblivious. And I'm shadow bound out the wazoo, so whatever I say really doesn't matter, but I'll still make my little YouTube channel for what it's worth. It'll be a historical record of what happened, if nothing else. Okay, so Stanford dropped the requirement that freshman students take a one-year course in the great books of Western civilization. Okay? And I remember that class better than any other class out of all my classes. It's more relevant to my life. Science classes over at Stanford were real intense, but they were generic. You can always give a person a harder test question. Whoop-de-doo. It doesn't really mean you're learning anything. All pre-meds take the same MCAT. Okay? Most people in the modern world are basically functional illiterates. They learned how to read in grade school and high school, but they don't read on their own, which means you're functional illiterate. And if you don't read, that's not much better than not knowing how to read. And if a society is illiterate, then they're not really capable of learning too much, and they're not headed towards a good future. And some people criticize Christianity and say, oh, well, the Spanish Inquisition, it killed some people. Killed about 2,000 persons in 400 years, a rate of about 5 per year. Yeah, and it was largely run by the rulers. It was a power trip for the rulers more so than it was a religious thing. Stalin, dispatched, I don't know how many million, I lose count, but overall they killed 65 million Christians in Soviet Russia, okay? How many did Chairman Mao bump off? At least another 40,000. So you're looking at over 100 million people killed in the 1900s because of communism. Okay, Dinesh D'Souza. He's a guy from India, but he is a Christian. He said, Christianity has always embraced both reason and faith. Christianity makes life a moral drama in which we play a starring role and in which the most ordinary events take on grand significance. Yep. Okay, the modern Western Christians like Esau, stupid, trading their birthright of the greatest civilization ever for all this modern crap. A cell phone. God. Okay, the ancient Greeks were like a miracle, man. They invented most of what's technological, electric and mechanical back in their day. In comparison, the Romans were sort of a bunch of thugs. What you learn about the Romans is how total power leads to abuse. Other than Cicero, Horace, and a few others, Quintilian. Okay. And I actually think Julius Caesar was a better guy than people give credit for. I think he was trying to make things better. I know he did some bad things. He did, but he was, I think, pushing to try to make things better. Okay, anyways, we talked about it before, how the Irish saved civilization by Thomas Cahill, and how the Irish monks kept all the ancient books, and they saved them all from disappearing. That was magnificent. Here's the Book of Kells, one of these versions of the Bible where they make all these illustrations in the margins. Thank God for the Irish monks. And basically, like I said, the Irish are thinkers or drinkers. Ireland's too poor. They've been slaves of the British for like 1,000 years, so you don't see art or technology coming out of Ireland. But you do have some really good writers, and you have incredible musicians and singers. The Vikings would just raid the monasteries and burn them down, steal everything. But luckily enough, there are so many monasteries and so many copies of these books that they survived. Okay. Let's see. And, people underestimate almost all this good stuff. It came from the Catholic Church. These scumbag atheists like the philosophes in France in the 1700s try to pretend that they were the Enlightenment. They make up this word for themselves called the Enlightenment, and then they claim the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. You know what? The so-called Dark Ages are where tons of advancements came. That's where they learned how to make the horses useful. They put a stirrup on them. Okay, so then you could have knights could joust. You had chivalry. They developed the horse harness so the horse could pull a plow. They're way faster than the oxen, and they can now plow the fields much faster and better and deeper. They developed better iron on their plows. So crop yields went through the roof in the Middle Ages. That's why the population took off. And the Catholic Church promoted learning. It made a university system out of the cathedrals. And that's where scholarship came from. Like with, first of all, you had, Charles the Great, Charlemagne, okay, and Alcuin in their school system, the Carolingian Renaissance. Then you had the Scholastic Renaissance with Alfred the Great and with, Thomas Aquinas. And that scholasticism led in Italy to Petrarch and the whole what we think of as the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, Sandro Botticelli, the Medicis, Michelangelo, Raphael, Pope Julius, and all the rest of them. Okay, that's where it came from. This doesn't exist anywhere else on earth. And all these guys were devoted to God. Michelangelo, art is the gift of God and must be used unto his glory. The mind and soul become ennobled by the quest to create something perfect. I work out of love for God. Typical way these guys would talk. Johann Sebastian Bach. I have always kept in goal one goal in view, to conduct church music to the glory of God. All music should be to the glory of God. Newton. He who thinks half-heartedly will not believe in God, but he who really thinks has to believe in God. I study the Bible daily. And it's totally correct. The more you learn about biology, it's fractal. You go down to a deeper magnification, it's just as complex and beautiful. A deeper level magnification, just as complex and beautiful. It's so far beyond the mind of any one person. It could only have been created by God. It's so incredibly complex and beautiful. Okay, Goethe. It is belief in the Bible which has served as the guide of my moral and literary life. Let mental culture go on advancing. Let the sciences progress, and the human mind widen itself as much as it desires. It will not reach the elevation and moral culture of Christianity as it shines forth in the Gospels. There it is. These are like the greatest geniuses of all times in their area, okay? Christianity's made the greatest mural paintings, Michelangelo and Raphael, the greatest canvas paintings, Van der Weyden, Caravaggio, Edmund Leighton, etc., sculptures, Pietà, architecture, Gothic cathedrals, music, Bach, Mozart, Handel, Beethoven, the Christmas carols. It goes on, Brahms, etc., etc. The literature, the musicals, the movies, the universities. It's going on, The Christians have done more for art and beauty on this planet than all the other cultures, times 1,000. It's just a fact. If you want to debate that, show me where the other culture's art is. Show me its architecture. Show me its sculpture. Show me its novels. They don't have it. Okay? All right, so what is the second best painting? The Light of the World. And the idea of this one by Wm Holman Hunt, he's part of the Pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, was that Christ knocks on the door, but you have to let him in. He doesn't force his way in. So if you don't want it, you don't get it. But society without it goes down the tubes. Okay? It's the Light of the World. Okay, now here's a beautiful painting. This is On the Road to Damascus, when St. Paul had his conversion moment from Saul to Paul. Okay? And there's actually funny stories behind this. We don't have time to go into all of it, what Caravaggio was getting at with the horse and all this other stuff. But still, it's a magnificent painting. This totally goes with Hank Williams Sr., I Saw the Light song, which is a great country music song. Okay, yeah, I wrote it down. I saw the light. We are the light of the world. Jean Anthony Grief. Yeah, Christians are the light of the world. Look around you outside. Who's putting the lights on outside their houses? The Christians. So when you drive home, you see all the beautiful Christmas lights and put you in a good mood. That comes from Christianity. Christmas comes from Christianity. The coldest time of the winter, the shortest days, and instead of being miserable and cold, it's beautiful and brightly lit. It becomes the best day of the year. That's what Christianity does. It takes the worst time of the year and makes it the best time of the year. Okay, I think we'll call it at that for today. I hope you found that helpful.